All right, great. Well, really wonderful to be with you all. People who will gather and talk about a budget on a Wednesday night, it just makes my heart go pitter patter. So, really glad that folks like you are out here, and it's a really consequential and historic time to talk about the budget. And those of you who've been around state government and state policy issues for a while know that the constant refrain for the last few decades has been there's just no money, or let's say refrain, or rather excuse, is that there's just no money to do the things we need to do as a state. That is not the case in any way with this budget. And I'll talk a little bit about why, but there actually is money to do good things and still prepare for the future. Because of the resources that are available. So this graph just shows what we're looking at in terms of a surplus. There's really sort of two ways in which we have more money this time. The one is that we got more money than we expected we would as a state. Of course, when you hit a pandemic, you expect the economy to collapse. The economy did collapse, of course. We lost 300,000 jobs in Kentucky, but the federal government, thankfully, through the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan Act, and others, acted aggressively to send people checks, to expand unemployment benefits, to provide food assistance, and so forth. And that money circulated through our economy, and it resulted in more state tax revenues. And so we got more money than we expected last year, $1.1 billion more. We're on track to get $1.9 billion more this year than we forecasted. And if you think about that in terms of our rainy day fund, it would bring our rainy day fund up to $3.4 billion, which is 28% of our annual spending. And if you go back to 1993, which is when we created the modern rainy day fund, we've never had more than about 4% of our budget in a rainy day fund, never more than 4. Our goal is 5 in statute. We've never gotten to that. We're gonna have 28% this year. So that's just extraordinary, and we can thank the federal action for that. But it's not just the one-time monies that we have. It's also the case that after those surpluses are over, we're still expecting revenues to grow. And that in large part has to do with, again, the way that the federal government has stimulated growth, the way that we've gotten employment back much faster than we did after the Great Recession. And so even you can see that this graph just shows that the little goldenrod is those surpluses that I just put in the last graph. So we got surpluses above what we budgeted in 2021 and 2022, or expected to. But then in 23 and 24, the revenue will continue to grow. And so by 2024, we'll have 27% more money than we had in 2020. So that's a good position to be in. And so one of the things you'll hear, and you've already heard about in the budget debate, is that this is one-time money, we shouldn't spend it on recurring expenses. When in reality, we have both one-time money, because we got in more than we expected, and we have recurring money that's grown significantly and that we can spend on recurring expenses. So there's no reason we can't do 3 things in this budget. 1, reinvest in many of the core services that we need as a state and things that will recur in the future. 2, use some one-time money for some one-time opportunities. And 3, leave plenty of money in the rainy day fund. As if that wasn't enough, thanks to the Congress and the Biden administration, we also have direct federal money from the American Rescue Plan Act. We've got another $1.1 billion that we have until 2024 to spend. That can be used on 4 things, and they're listed here, but basically respond to the pandemic, the harm to people, provide bonus pay to essential workers, prevent cuts in public services, and invest in water and sewer and broadband. So we've got 1.1 billion. We already spent 1.1 billion last year. This graph shows how we spent that. Unfortunately, about half of it went to essentially cut business taxes. That's what repayment of the unemployment loan does. It doesn't help unemployed workers. It helps businesses slightly lower their taxes. Not the best use of the money. But we did put some money in broadband and water and sewer. So we have another 1.1 billion there to help people who are really hurting because of this pandemic and otherwise. So we do have some money for a change. Good news. And it's particularly important because we have been cutting the budget in Kentucky for a long, long time. In fact, we've experienced 20 rounds of budget cuts since 2008, and that has undermined our ability to provide core services across the board. If you look at our K-12 spending, what's called the K-12 guarantee per pupil is down 26% from 2008 levels. And this graph just shows we're not only cutting it, we're shifting it over to the local level, which, local school districts' ability to fund education varies widely based on their wealth. Funding for university and community colleges is down a third. Number of child care centers in the state is down nearly half as we've cut their funding. And then we just have all these areas of government with high caseloads, if you look at social workers, public defenders, et cetera. We have long waiting lists. The governor talked today about the 7,000 seniors who are on waiting lists for meals programs, and just fewer services dramatically. So we have a lot of needs, and we never began, unlike most other states, we never began reversing these cuts before COVID hit. It's also the case that, our state employee compensation has really reached a crisis point. There are 7,000 unfilled positions in state government. We are simply unable to attract and retain workers. We did a study back in 2010. That time, if you worked in the public sector, you made 12.8% less than comparable workers in the private sector once you adjust for education and age and everything. That was in 2010. Since then, average state government employment or pay is down 4%. Average private sector pay is up 13% since that time. So the gap is widened. No across the board raises for 10 of the last 12 years. And then in 2013 for state workers, and starting this month for teachers, the defined benefit pension is no more. And so one of the real tools that we've used to attract and retain people in the public sector is gone. And that is a huge contributor to the turnover and the inability to attract workers. So this is a major issue with this budget. So our core message that we've been talking about is that it's time to invest. We shouldn't be sidelining too much money in our rainy day fund. There's plenty to put money in the rainy day fund. We shouldn't be sidelining too much when there's still so many needs out there and so many areas we have to reinvest in. Our pensions are on a positive trajectory now, ever since we began to fund them again, the full actuarially determined contribution. So we don't need to go crazy with that. We just need to continue to fund them. And then we must not, and this is something we're very concerned about, squander once in a generation opportunity on tax cuts. I'll close with just two more slides. One is that we heard the House budget, the House filed their budget early on Friday, and it is, despite this revenue picture that's very encouraging, it's still a very austere budget. Leaves over $3 billion on the table, includes only really slight changes to education funding, not really enough to give significant raises for teachers and school employees and bus drivers in many districts. There is a 6% raise for employees. First year of the budget was 0 in the second. 6% is a little less than inflation is running right now. It's now running at 7%. There's some modest reinvestment in other areas, some good things in the positive direction, but it's all very modest. It only spends half of that 1.1 billion in ARPA money, including another chunk to lower business taxes. So the big debate and concern is that we will have this opportunity but not seize it by passing too austere a budget. And I'll close with just saying we're concerned it will be too austere and they'll leave too much money on the table, but then squander that on tax cuts. And particularly, we're concerned about a cut in the income tax. It's extraordinarily expensive to begin cutting the income tax. If you cut it just from 5%, we have a 5% flat tax now as of 2018. If you cut it from 5 to 4, that costs more money than we spend on higher education. All the universities and community colleges combined that money would be gone. If you just drop it 1/10 of a point, That's more money than we spend on preschool. So you can spend a ton of money on these kind of tax cuts. And what that will cause us to do is increase sales taxes, which raise taxes for low and middle income Kentuckians. And this graph just shows what would happen if we cut the income tax from 5 to 4%. We'd have to have the highest state sales tax in the country. And the bottom 60% of Kentuckians, the poorest 60%, would pay more, while those at the top would pay less, especially millionaires. The top 1% would get an average tax cut of $8,731 a year if we did that. So we're very concerned that this surplus could be squandered very quickly if we talk about income tax cuts and other corporate tax cuts. And if that's where we spend the money, if that's where this General Assembly is heading.